What is up, Hauserites? I'm Jason Hauser, and today we're going to talk about how I got into slasher films. Now, before we get into this, check out my bizarre slasher film, Frank Hates You. It is a short film, linked in the description below. Also, check out my movie group, Movie Talk with Hauser, for film buffs and filmmakers, linked in the description, blah. And finally, if you have goals in life, if you have dreams to follow, or if you just want to be fucking weird, check out Hauser, linked in the description below. Let's get on with it. Once upon a time, in Denver, Colorado, Jason Michael Hauser was born Jason Michael Strock on October 8th, 1997. Fun fact, my family did not name me after the fictional killers Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. Long story short, I was in Campbell Elementary. I first got into Goosebumps. Eventually, I got into vampires. But before I got into vampires, I was introduced to these fictional killers. I saw Chucky. I saw Jason. I saw Michael. I saw Freddy. At the time, I thought that it was just horror. Later on, I got into vampires. Eventually, I kind of lost interest in vampires and decided to get into serial killer genre. Long story short, I was studying some species of animals. So if there's certain types of spiders or certain types of, well, arachnids in general, there has to be certain types of horror films. And then I find out there's such a thing called a sub-genre. Long story short, I found this thing called a slasher film. So I found out that movies such as Halloween, Friday the 13th, even A Nightmare on Elm Street, even Scream, or I Know What You Did Last Summer, all of those movies count as a slasher film. So then I decided to look at its history. Now, this is interesting because this is where I found genres such as the giallo genre. At the time, I didn't understand the difference between giallo or slasher. As I get older and study more, I start understanding the difference, as well as watching the movies themselves. But then I find this bizarre genre of horror called the splatter film. I was finding some interesting subgenres of horror in general, but then I realized something. Slasher films and splatter films, most of the time at least, they use humans as the monster, whereas giallo is basically a mystery thriller that uses detective elements and serial killers that resemble, well, you kind of get it. If you are watching this video, you should probably know what a slasher film is. The more I study slasher films, the more I find interesting shit that predates slasher movies and then derives from slasher movies. Eventually, I found out that gialli and slashers both have a predecessor known as the German Krimi film. In fact, slasher films have more to their history. Eventually, I find movies such as 13 Women or The Leopard Man. Then all of a sudden I find movies that fall under the category of gornos, aka torture porn. But honestly, I just prefer slasher movies over any other type of movie. I remember when I was in Arvada West and I had a teacher, let's just call him Mr. Johnson. That's not his real name, but I'm going to call him Mr. Johnson anyways. Now, Mr. Johnson one day asked me if I was just into horror films in general or into slasher movies. The more I realized, slasher films are my go-to. I usually get in some debates whether slasher movies are horror or not, or even the similar genres that resemble slasher movies. Honestly, in my personal opinion, horror is evolving, and horror and thriller combined, they work pretty well together. I feel like slasher films are more on the psychological side of things. One of the genres that predates slashers are psychological horror and thriller combined. You have psychological thrillers like Psycho or Peeping Tom, but they also had horror elements. See, this was the beginning of 1960s, and they wanted to scare people with something realistic. Man, humans can be the scariest things in real life. The more filmmakers started experimenting with elements of horror and serial killer films in general, the more it evolved to these types of movies. If you ask me, I feel like slasher films derive from horror, thriller, mystery, crime. If you want to get more specific, krimi films. In Germany, in Italy, you had giallo films. In my personal opinion, some gialli had some horror elements, depending on which giallo you were watching. And then you have splatter movies. Splatter movies derive from the cheesy B-status films. They get their inspiration from onstage violence. They would eventually inspire Gornos. Now, some people don't consider torture porn as horror. I personally disagree. I feel like they're horror mixed with other genres, honestly. Exploitation, splatter, even slashers and giallo. Gornos are basically a mixture of a lot of things. Anyways, back on topic, I eventually got into making slasher films myself. And I started making my short films and web series inspired by slasher movies, gialli, mostly slasher flicks. Some of them were inspired by B movies in general. My recent film, Frank Hates You, is probably the best one I've ever done. And that's why it's my favorite. Well, more specifically, it's because it's based on personal shit that I've been going through. Honestly, I'm tired of autism and bipolar being judged by people. It's not gonna stop. But what I can do to cope with it is find supporters. See, slasher movies are my therapy. They don't make me per se. They're just part of me. The film I made, Frank Hates You, is my personal slasher flick. The slashing in Frank Hates You is more of a metaphor. The slashing elements is basically me expressing anger. Nowadays, you have slasher movies that are open-minded in other types of genres. You have Happy Death Day or even Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and it sounds cheesy, and some people may say it's unoriginal. But then again, what is original? Every single thing that you've seen in a movie, it's from something. It comes from something that existed before it. Stories in general will evolve over time. They will change over time. Now let's stop right there. The main point of this video, besides me talking about my interests, no matter what you are into, or if you want to do something in life, or if you're inspired by something, it's not too late. I'm heavily inspired by slasher movies and other types of horror, such as psychological horror. So when you look at my group linked in the description below called Hauser, that's what it's about. You don't tell people your goals or your dreams. You also be yourself. It's best to show, not tell, first of all. And honestly, you don't need anyone's validation. All you need is your own vision. If you want to do something in life, don't ask for anyone's opinion. Some people might think that it's a small goal. Well, it's only small for them and not for me. So if you're a filmmaker and you're inspired by horror movies, I encourage you to use them as inspiration if you're really into it. Seriously, you can do anything you want in life. Forget what people say. They say that you can't do it. That's bullshit. Anyways, my name is Jason Hauser. Thank you for being a Hauserite. Make sure you subscribe for more things like this. And don't forget to like this video because I'm the shit. Thank you guys so much for watching Frank Hates You. I appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Jason Hauser. You were just watching the Jason channel. Peace.